Okay, we will go ahead and get started. So good morning. I'm Christina Churchill, and I'm the Academic Technology Director for the School of Business. And this morning we will be discussing faculty lessons learned with remote teaching. And today I have three outstanding faculty here with me to just kind of discuss their field, just their experiences and what they've learned through all of this. So hopefully this will be helpful to you. I do want to let you know that this is being recorded. So just as you registered on the webinar, there will be a button that says watch the webinar. So in case you want to rewatch it. So it looks like we do have a few more people joining, so we'll wait one more minute. Okay, I think we're pretty much loaded on here. Okay, so if you guys would take a couple minutes and introduce yourself and what you do, what you teach, and really your experience on online teaching. Aria, do you want to go first?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. My name is Aria Cabot. I work in the World Languages and Literatures Department as the director of their Teaching and Technology Center. I also teach online courses at SMU. I've been developing and teaching online courses for several years here. But this spring was my first experience with the shift to emergency remote teaching. And then I taught a remote course in June. So I've had sort of both ends of the spectrum, right, from full preparation to the emergency shift that most of you have probably experienced as well, and then in June to having a little bit more time to prepare.
That's great. Marcela?
So I'm Marcela Giraldo. I teach in the economics department, and I teach a finance and a statistics class within the economics department. I taught in the spring 4 classes, so I had to do an emergency transition on 4 classes, and I think learn different things from each one, since I had a slightly different methods of teaching on each class, and so it was a variety of experiences within that one semester.
That's great. And Bivin?
Hi, yeah, my name is Bivin Sadler, and I'm coming at you live from Fondren Science. I forgot that this light automatically turns off, so maybe we can get that thing come back on. But cool, I graduated in 2014 with a degree in statistics, with a PhD in statistics from SMU, and a lecture job opened up. So I lectured half in the stat department, and we had a brand new program called MSDS at the time, which is a completely online master's degree program in data science. And so I've been teaching in that for the last 6 years, and 2 years ago, I went completely to the online side. So, like Ari, I've developed since then a lot of coursework in our online program and taught a lot of online courses. But I also was teaching one of my favorite classes, 2331 Intro to Stat, 120 student stat course last semester, when we all have those stories. And it was a lot of fun, and it was, necessity is the mother of invention. So I'm really anxious to hear kind of everybody's experiences and share some that I hope will be useful.
Great, thank you. And I do want to tell the audience, since this is a webinar, we obviously can't hear you, but you're very welcome to put any questions you have in the Q&A area, and I will go ahead and ask them to the faculty as we go through this. So let's start with challenges you encountered during this. So obviously we want to learn from our experiences and learn from, okay, how can we do things better in the future? Hopefully we won't have an emergency situation again, but what are some challenges you encountered in your transition, or maybe even when you planned this summer and you did things online, and how did you deal with those challenges? How did you solve those issues? And you guys can just openly just talk.
To me, the biggest, let's start from a failure that I had and what I learned from it, was in communication. So first was a lot of changes occurred all of a sudden, And I try to go with announcements or post things under, I had always been posting things on pages, but I guess I didn't always click on make sure to update students. And so a lot of students were missing relevant information for continuing. And then for other classes, I had the opposite, and it was too many announcements, and the students had too much information, you know, one in one announcement, another in another, and every day things were changing. And so it was almost as good as not having sent anything, as happened in another section. The way I concluded was the best. It was my conclusion was, instead of using announcement, this is sort of opposite to what is being recommended, but it was my lesson. Instead of using announcements where you have a whole bunch of pieces of information that the students don't always know where it is, I created a page with updates, and I made it a home page, and then I had it by date. And I've made sure now that the pages have a place where you can send the updates so students know that that page has been updated. And so there was one place where they had all the updated information, and I tried to have as few information, only what they really needed to be aware of, rather than a history of all of the information I had sent before.
That's interesting. I've never really heard of anyone using it that way, but very interesting. So how, Bivin, how did you handle communication? What were your challenges, and how is that handled?
So that was a really big one, because I got a good 2 or 3 weeks in and realized that a large portion of this 120 students just weren't receiving the messages. I was like, they're asking questions. I already had posted something, or they missed an assignment and I already posted it. So one thing, kind of just piggybacking on top of that, was just simply communicating with them in class about how I'm going to send things. And this, I don't recommend this, but this is how I handled it, was sending things 2 ways. One, I was going to put it on the Canvas announcement, and then I ended up putting it on the Canvas webpage, homepage, so I knew that they'd see it when they logged into Canvas. That was one thing. And the other one was email, to really look at their email, because that's how one method I was going to use to communicate with them. But another big piece was the modules in Canvas. So that wasn't necessarily direct communication, but it was a one-stop shop for everything that was due. So once they were kind of trained, if you will, or used to going to modules, I didn't have to communicate that this was due or that was due. You just go to the module and it would say what was due in what order. And since it was in order, it kind of, you can even set up prerequisites in there, so they have to follow it in a certain order. So that was really useful too. But yeah, posting to the homepage on Canvas was huge for me. And every time, especially with undergraduates, but maybe with everybody, is just constant communication. I kind of made the mistake of saying, well, I said it once, and saying it once, in my experience, is close to not really saying it at all. So yeah, just constant communication from a lot of different media, and in class, every time opening and closing with, check your email, check Canvas homepage. Those will be updated, and that's how I'm communicating with you.
That's great. Aria, how about you? How did you handle communication?
Well, I think that my experience is in some ways opposite from Bivin's, and my class size was very small. And so for me, the biggest challenge was sort of delineating the boundaries between the human and the technological, right? So I think that a lot of my concern during the immediate shift to remote was providing the community and the support to students that was no longer available to them in person on campus. And so part of that, I think, turned into an unsustainable amount of communication, right? Because my class size, like I said, was very small. It was also a group of students that was supposed to travel abroad with me for a study abroad program. And so I knew them fairly well outside of the classroom before the term began. And I think I really ran the risk of over-investing personally in the students, and also not having at my disposal the correct resources. So it wasn't just academic questions, it was stress about moving and family life and family members who are ill. And so I think for me, one of the biggest challenges was finding a way, as Marcela and Bivin did, of communicating, creating a space for community discussions, making myself available at specific times, and then creating resources, right? So if you're dealing with X, Y, or Z, here are resources that are available to you on campus, even in a virtual setting. I think that there's this weird dynamic that a lot of us face between wanting to become these sort of 24/7 chatbots where, you know, our students could reach out at any time and we'd be available. And that's something that I'm still working with. I mean, if a student contacted me at 11 p.m. because of our own personal lives, I might have been working at that time and been very tempted to say, hey, let's just meet now on Zoom. And I've learned that it's probably better early on to establish some sort of boundary so that we're all working in a condition that is as close to the on-campus environment as possible.
Right, and having those boundaries, I think, are good. And then at the same time, you still want to develop those relationships. You don't want it to be so sterile that that your course is just material and the students don't build that relationship with you and connect really also with the material. So what are some things that you guys did to try to encourage building or continuing that relationship with your students beyond just, okay, this is all the things that you need to do? Were there some things, some strategies that you used to keep that line of, you know, personal time and at the same time develop relationships? Anyone? Marcela? I don't know.
Got me there. I feel like my main concern when we went online was, how do I keep the relationships with each other? And the way in my classes, I always have a big part of collaboration, what I call them group quizzes. So questions that I expect them to solve together, and even some labs that I expect them to work together. And so I use the break rooms in Zoom a lot, so that about every week they had. And this semester, I also plan to tell them that part of the purpose of those activities is not just so that they learn from each other and all what academically there is to gain from working together, but also a big part of why students come to SMU is they want to know people that they would hire, that they would want to make a company with and start something. It's those relationships that they get from each other. And in part, I know that the university is strongly encouraging us to make sure that it's very possible to do asynchronic classes. And I would want to personally encourage students in different time zones to do their best to try to join synchronically and even change their schedules if possible, because when not, they really miss both asking questions to me, but my main concern, and so that's where you tricked me in your question, because I'm not sure, maybe I should worry more about how to encourage those relationships with me. But my main concern is you're going to lose connections with each other if you're just watching the videos later.
Right, and that brings up a good point, collaboration. So how did you handle, Marcela handled it with breakout rooms and stuff, but what are some things that you would recommend for faculty to incorporate to invite this collaboration, this feeling of collaboration within the classroom? Bivin? Oh, we can't hear you.
I love when that happens.
Okay.
Yeah, so yeah, I'd love to piggyback and kind of bring that all together. I think Marcela nailed it, and it's not kind of separate questions. I look at it as a team. Like I do a lot of coaching, and I kind of tell everybody from the very beginning, I kind of approach this as it's kind of weird because I'm the referee and the coach and sometimes a player, but you know, we've got this final, this big playoff game at the end. We have all these practices going on. And so, but keeping that connection together is key, and is also key for the whole team to work. So, and kind of going on what Ari said was, kind of this rhythm, this schedule. So I had a 4 live session assignment. I'd have some async material, and then they'd have to complete assignment before coming to class. And this is kind of what we found worked at the MSDS program, that master's program I'm working with, is watch some async, actually have thought about it in the form of attempting a problem, and then bringing that to class. And our TAs go through and make sure that everyone hasn't done it right, but that everyone's done an honest, genuine effort at it. And you can see that it's a PowerPoint deck, and they just go through each one. And then they come in, now they've got something, the idea is they're fired up, they're invested in it already. They want to know if they got the right answer. They want to see if somebody else came up from a different answer. And so then into the breakout rooms they go. This was a statistics class, so there's those type of questions. And then they can communicate and build those connections. And then finally on top of that, and then we come back in and I go through the solution. They're invested, so they have questions. It seemed to work out pretty well, even in the undergrad, even in the 120 large classroom setting. But one last thing, if I can, on kind of the communication in the relationship is, for me, everyone has their own style, and everyone, and I really believe that can come through even through Zoom. Like, I love the fact that you can see my mouth move as it goes, and I've got hand expressions. We can crack jokes and read polls. There's so much you can do even on the online classroom that you can't do in the on-campus classroom, like breakouts, like put people in groups and bring them back in really quickly. But they have to be there in order to do it, to Marcela's point also. So the last thing that I kind of felt like that was really working, that I didn't do very well as soon as it happened, because my class sizes, almost 120 came the first day. And it wasn't long before I was down to 80, if I could tell on myself there. And I wasn't feeling that great about it. And I kind of capped it at 80 and got it back up to 90 by very early personally responding to those who weren't in class. So personally, we don't probably have time to do 120 emails every day for people that didn't come to class. But in my experience, if you did a bunch early, again, like, they know that you're paying attention and they're not just things floating around in space, that somebody's actually paying attention. And it seemed, at least in the numbers, to stabilize and to work out. So thanks for the extended time there, but
cool. Good.
I would also like to piggyback off of what Bivin said. The idea of creating a pre-activity and a post-activity before the synchronous meeting, I think, is a really great way to give students a low-stakes incentive to give an honest shot at the material without any incentive at all to look up resources externally. So I know there was a question in the Q&A earlier about what do you do for courses like, but not just math, but languages too, where it's pretty easy to Google Translate something and it comes out okay, maybe better than if they had tried on their own. And so I had a very similar strategy before our synchronous meetings. I'd ask them to do quite a bit of work without, relying on any external resources, and to say, you're going to get a really good grade on this if you just give an honest attempt. And use this as an opportunity to test your own knowledge, and then take advantage of us in our synchronous meetings to clarify all of the doubts you have, identify what your weak points are. And that was really useful for me, because it was also enlightening when they got into an exam situation, and maybe not a large percentage, but that small percentage that all of a sudden produced perfect work in a testing environment that they couldn't do before. Then you can reach out to those students and say, hey, I noticed a big discrepancy between, the work that we were doing in class and the work that you produced here. Can we talk about that? But by and large, it was actually pretty consistent. And if the work was, not ideal, at least it was an opportunity for students to perform consistently and honestly and identify what their weak points were. And so I think it was helpful for me as an instructor to see really where students were, work with students who needed additional help, and show students that it's actually much better to work on a daily basis, really delving into the material, and to reward those students with a pretty good grade for their constant participation, rather than, their performance on an exam.
Interesting. And I do want to kind of piggyback, because we did have a question on, the increasing number of tools that students gives give them the answers and even show them the work. And so you can't really just say, okay, can you show me your work and think, okay, they figured it out. No, there's lots of tools out there. What are some ideas to maintain the integrity of exams and assignments? What are some approaches that you've taken to really assess the student if they're meeting the learning objective?
Me jump in on that one?
Sure, absolutely.
I'll start us off. So, so yeah, that was a really big challenge. That's always a challenge in class, and of course online, and of course with any size class, but bigger is probably a little more challenging. Is back to Ari's statement earlier. I tried to keep it as in classroom as possible. I tried to keep everything, you know, as less different, as the same as possible. Very early on in the first, that was another thing, in the first week, I would expect a ton of mistakes and have patience with everybody and ask them to have patience with you. And, you know, especially this SMU Flex, like I've never done that before. I've never used the technology. I'm teaching one of the Flex courses on campus, and then, you know, whoever wants to be online can be online. So, but I think I'm going to do the same thing. And that was, you know, I have them scan in their work. So I was one of the ones who would say, you're going to do it by hand, you're going to scan it and then send it in. And then we're going to actually print them out and grade them. And then we've scanned them and sent them back. So that was a lot of work, but it wasn't that much work. And I thought it maintained it. Another thing was, just in the MSDS program, I've found, and we've tried it almost every way I can imagine. And for the last couple of years, I've really kind of imposed this on the whole program, is making sure everybody's cameras are on or in the classroom. So can they game that system? Yeah, you know, they can. Can they chat and do things? But I do think, you know, I'm gonna go on a limb here. I do think that helps, just knowing that somebody's there and I'm kind of bouncing around and they can see me and they can see everybody else and they know it's recorded. And typically I don't see those who have been to office hours and those who, you know, who have done well in the homeworks and who haven't, or who I talk to Ari's point, when I go into breakout rooms and I've talked to somebody, I know that they know the material, and others that I know that haven't been there, the grades are pretty consistent. I don't have any where I'm like, oh, you know, that person really surprised me with 100% on the final. Usually that doesn't, I don't have those kind of outliers. So there's just less opportunity and maybe, anyhow, those are my two, is print them out, handwrite them, send them in, and keep them on the Zoom.
Marcela, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, no, I think that this problem is very related to the particular department you're in. For me, in statistics and finance classes, because it's a lot of problem-based, they're not going to find the answers to these questions online easily. And so I have a similar experience in that I don't have a lot of surprises. So, you know, how did the students get these magic 100 when they were performing so poorly before? I did use a lot of these Canvas tricks of, you know, randomizing the questions and the order and keeping one at a time so that they wouldn't minimize their opportunity to do the exam with somebody else. And so I did use a lot of these Canvas tools, but let's say that although it's of course a concern because the students can do these, I'm a little less concerned starting this semester than I was before, because for my particular class, I have learned there's less of an opportunity for them to just find answers already done. And so the trick for the people in departments where that's more likely is maybe a trick on evaluation of how can we change the evaluation, being aware of all of those resources that are out there nowadays.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so let's talk about asynchronous material. So recorded material. Did you create it? How did it work? What were things that you loved or hated? Or, you know, can you give the participants just kind of some feedback on that?
I can start there. I decided for my June remote class to go half and half. So I had 50% synchronous meetings and 50% asynchronous. It's a course that I've taught many times before, so I had the lesson plans and slides and activities pretty much planned. I just needed to think about how to convert them into an asynchronous format. The tool that I chose to use was PlayPap. So I basically went through my normal day in class, but it took me probably about 10 to 15 minutes rather than 50. And so I would, pose the same kinds of questions that I would normally to students, go through my whole class, and then the video of that lecture, which was, like I said, I try to keep it always under 15 minutes. I would convert into an interactive PlayPap activity with open-ended questions, poll questions, discussion questions, multiple choice questions, designed to take about 50 minutes because that was the amount of time that my class would have met synchronously. And so students would log in anytime that day and interact with the lecture with each other. And then usually it would end with some kind of discussion board assignment. So they'd either be responding by video or by post, something a little bit more like an applied question or a personal response. And that I actually got really good feedback about the use of PlayPap in the classes. Students felt like it was an equivalent experience in terms of absorbing the material and, most importantly, identifying the essential elements. That was something that I got a lot of responses from students who had been trying to follow along longer lectures in other classes and saying, my biggest problem is that I don't know how to distill the most important aspects of a 50-minute lecture. And so I really try to be sensitive to that and help them kind of signpost along the way. This is key. Can you confirm that you have understood this one, aspect of today's material?
Absolutely. And for those of you that are participating, if you're interested in PlayPap, probably the easiest way to get information is to just submit a ticket at help@smu.edu, and someone will reach out to you on getting you information to get logged in and stuff. So you take the video and then you bring it into PlayPap and you're able to embed these questions and activities and so forth. So if you are interested, that is an opportunity, a technology that'll help you with that. So great, thank you so much for that. Bivin or Marcela, would you like to add to that on asynchronous?
Well, my classes were mostly, I really wanted them to come at the same time and meet. So it was mostly synchronic, but still the exams and the labs that we do, the use of software, there was a lot of opportunity for them if they couldn't come to do it at different times. So it was mostly assignments and projects through that way that they could do individually or in groups. I encouraged them to form groups so that it would be the same group throughout the rest of the semester. Number one, to encourage those relationships. And also, the way I form groups is because it happened at the beginning of the semester, I had information about how good their understanding of the class was. And I tried to make sure that it was good students, like the excellent students together, like similar level of understanding. I did not want the very best student with the students who were not understanding very good. And this may sound contradictory because you would think that the good student would teach a lot to the student that's not understanding. But my concern is that in practice, what would happen is that the good student would be doing the entire project, and that the, let's call bad student, or the one who was struggling more in the class, would not really learn, but just write on the effort of the other student. So I try to make the groups what I consider similar level of understanding. That would be a challenge to do from the beginning of the class, but it's something that I was able to do halfway onwards.
That's a great idea. And I think maybe if you have some sort of assessment that you have them take ahead of time so you can kind of judge the level, maybe that would, since you don't know the students coming in early on, that's a great idea. Bivin, and you are muted, so, how did you handle asynchronous material?
So the async material that I kind of mentioned a little bit before, that kind of is the backbone of the whole strategy of the course, was exactly that. And that's how we do it again in the MSDS program. But so yeah, I used QuickTime on my Mac and YouTube to deliver it. But basically, like I said, I can't underline enough how to just, I think the students really respond to your style coming out. And so what might work for me won't work for somebody else, and what work for somebody else won't work for me. But that really comes out. And I think even in your videos, I've heard a lot of negative and positive for the async. And I think that there is a lot, I think there's a lot of positive if you can convey this excitement you have for your subject and excitement you have for your students. And, it's the same thing in the classroom. So I would break mine up into, 5-10 minute videos, but I would have a good 50-minute lecture. Sometimes I kind of took advantage of it because I would be tempted to go over in class, but the undergrads won't let you do it. But I could go over on video. So I wouldn't recommend that, but if there's a little something extra you want to get in there, you can get it in there. But, and then I would say, well, based on that, and be very careful, but based on that, I'd have a Word doc that says, do these exercises and put them in a PowerPoint, take that PowerPoint and submit it to Canvas. And then my TAs would go through and check to make sure that they weren't checking, they could do it pretty quick to make sure that they had genuine answers, not just blank slides or just nonsense or just nothing at all. And if we didn't, then we would immediately let the student know, hey, where's maybe you forgot to turn this in. So they knew that somebody was watching. And so all that was kind of connected. But then, so that async played into the 4 live session assignment, and then that came into the breakouts. So I guess if we're specifically talking about the async, that's kind of how it was done. But I live kind of by White Rock Lake. So I do one out by White Rock Lake. I think I did one in downtown once, it was kind of ghost town out there. But, and then I would do one in my man cave garage, which was my makeshift thing, and then out in my backyard. So, the students, I felt, responded to when they knew that you were putting forth a lot of effort, then they wanted to put forth a lot of effort. And it kind of, again, became a family environment. One last thing on that PlayPap, I hadn't heard about it until basically 2 days ago. And then Ari's talking about it here. And then I saw, I think in this week-long, there's a session on it that I was excited to go go look at. Aria, are you doing that session?
I'm not doing that session. I've attended probably something similar from one of our ATS directors before, and I can't recommend it highly enough. It's very easy to use, integrates with Canvas, integrates with the gradebook. Yeah, it's a great tool. And because it integrates with Canvas, it's easy for students. It's not like sending them out to some external website. It's all right there in the same place.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I was trying to look up, we do have the representative that does the trainings for PlayPap, doing the PlayPap trainings. And I will let you know whenever I find it, I'll let you know when it is, so the audience will be able to, oh, here it is, let's see. It looks like that will be on the 21st at 11 is the PlayPap. That one is embedding questions in PlayPap and syncing with Canvas assignments. And then there's also another session, personalized learning through PlayPap, and that will be on the 21st at 10. So PlayPap gives you the ability, according to whatever the answers they gave, to kind of take different routes throughout the questioning. So to kind of create that personalized learning experience. So, okay, so kind of going back a little bit to asynchronous material, and I guess this is more for Bivin and Aria. So give us, like, how do you set up your camera? What about lighting? What about, like, how do you create a good quality video that doesn't make it look like, okay, this is a home video and you're moving your camera everywhere and everybody's getting dizzy? What, kind of create, tell us what you've done, what's worked for you, what hasn't worked for you, some helpful tips for those that are wanting to create this material?
Well, I think if I can start, what Bivin mentioned about being in different environments, I think is actually a great tool and a great tip because it's dynamic. I have a series of videos where I'm wearing the same outfit because I filmed the whole semester in one day in a studio and I feel like I'm just a floating head in a white background. So I've often said that sometimes the more professional videos are actually a lot harder to get through. They're not as entertaining. And I've seen instructor videos where they're in their kitchen making breakfast. I mean, they're tying it in some way to the material, right? So I think if you can show that you're a human being working with this stuff in real life, that's much more engaging in some way than a professional, well-lit, neutral background setting. And I tell my students the same thing. So I try to give them that kind of practice as well. So I think these remote courses have given us an opportunity to get pretty meta about our material and say, let me show you in a professional but also a realistic environment how I'm working with this material in my real life. And for me as a language teacher, I saw better work being produced from my students in the remote courses than in person because they were able to really find models. I mean, I had students doing yoga demonstrations, cooking demonstrations. So yes, thinking about camera and lighting and being professional, but also saying, okay, I'm looking online and seeing how the whole world right now is going virtual. Everything is virtual. And there are plenty of good models. So I would say my tip is not to use myself as much as possible. If I can find a better example of someone doing what I want to say on a YouTube video or somewhere else, I'll certainly pull that in. I think it's more interesting to have multiple faces in multiple places than just same old me in my office in a well-lit setting. So that's my prerogative.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, I couldn't underline that more. Coincidentally, we did Robert Hunt, who I met yesterday. I think he's in theology. We did one of these yesterday on that. So there is a recorded video with about an hour on how to, what equipment you need and kind of tips and tricks. And I'll just share a couple that we had coming out of that. That's actually where this little plot came from. I did it right here yesterday. That's where my little plot came from. But actually this lighting has turned into this is the sunlight coming at me. Like I've made this mistake before. And a lot of times, make sure you're kind of watching yourself. But so this, you can see me and it's kind of conversational. I'm in a classroom. I highly recommend that for myself. I think it gives it a lot of genuineness when even if they're at home, they got the feel of a classroom. That's one of the places I'd go. But if you come back over here where the light is behind, well, now the light comes on. Okay. But when the light's behind me, you can't see it. In fact, Christine always cringes when I do this. Can I share my screen real quick? I just have one.
Yeah, you should be able to share your screen.
Yeah, I was just getting permission. So this is from the deck that I had yesterday. And here's an example. So I actually shot that yesterday. This was in a Starbucks and I'm in the same seat, rotated 180 degrees. So that's, and sometimes you'll see that. See if there were any other ones in there. Yeah, this one was professionally produced in a studio. And this one was with a lamp at home with some backlighting. I did that with a sheet. So if you're really into that, but I'm with Aria is that, I think if you can do it from Starbucks, this one was the same one at Starbucks and I think it almost beats all of them. And that was the one at the lake in case you want to get fancy with it. I could have probably freeze framed it a little bit better there. But the last piece of that is in producing, virtual whiteboards, if you use anything like that, again, it's your style, but that is just not my style. My handwriting's bad on those things and there's a little delay between when I write and when it comes up on the screen. And, obviously for years I've been doing things on chalkboards and whiteboards, and you can do everything you want to do right here on the whiteboard. As soon as you figure out how high, you put a little mark up there, and you see my little mark. You put a little mark up there and you know exactly where your thing is, and you can say, I can draw my normal distribution, make sure you get a good marker. that's another one. Make sure you get a good marker. You know, you can put in your normal distribution, and you can write, you know, you can clearly see everything that's going on there. So I just remember that our third party had said, don't use whiteboards, don't use chalkboards. But when I talked to my students and I did it, they were like, we prefer that, and I prefer that. So so it's worked out for years. So I just kind of go with that.
Well, and that's interesting because I would probably be a person, I would be cringing because you're using the whiteboard. I'm like, no, I can't see it. But it is a different experience, and it depends. I think what's really important is to make sure that your students are able to see. I can tell you if you use green, for example, green is nearly impossible to see on the whiteboard, or, you know, so if you do go that direction, to be really sensitive in, okay, what can they see, and not assume that they're able to see the board when you're doing that. So, but okay.
Can I add one more piece on top of that?
Yes, absolutely.
Sorry, just one thing that I forgot there that came out of that. I just really think also that if you're producing async material, two things is really get ready. I think I don't shoot it. I don't think I've shot anything the first time, and it's usually 3 to 10 times before I get something that's each time it gets a little more polished, it gets a little more timed. If I'm doing a PowerPoint deck, I know what's coming next. I kind of know how to play into the next thing because I know what's coming, and so 3 to 10 times for me, I wouldn't be surprised. But at the same token, I always look at it as this could be like a legacy. Like I have a 2-year-old daughter. I'm always visioning like she's going to watch this, probably never do it, but she's going to watch it one day, or like my great grandkids are going to watch it. Like it lives forever. So I'm going to make it this awesome, you know, this awesome kind of token in time. So I would just be, I would expect if you really want a quality video that I think really does go a long way, just know you're not alone if it's taking you 3 to 4 to 5 to 10 times to do it.
Yes, absolutely. Those take a long time to do. Okay, we only have about 3-4 more minutes to go, but I do have 2 more questions that I want to make sure we cover. One is, what are some things that you learned to absolutely avoid? Like if you were, you know, things that you learned that you're like, oh, I'm never doing this again. What are some things that you can share with the participants to help them? Marcela, you want to go?
Yeah, I was nervous about how much to confess. No, I teach, like I said, 4 classes. And one of those classes is one of those where I finished and I said, this is something I'm not trying again. And I thought it would be a great success because it falls into the, you know, modern way of thinking of education and leaving more to the student to learn and use our meeting time mostly to solve problems and, you know, the application and learn. What I learned is you can't count on the students reading what you told them to read, even when there is testing and evaluation and quizzing. The other thing that I learned is, well, let me conclude that before I go to the next, is I think the lecture is extremely important. Even if there's a lot of movement within education that the lecture it's something of the past, I've learned there's minimum 2 main roles that you should have when you sit and teach others. And one is to encourage them, even if you're going to have a lot of expectations for them to do a lot of learning on their own. They really need to hear your experience, and so they get excited. They need to know what it is that they will learn, so then they'll want to learn it. And second important role is to use the lecture at the end to conclude what they should have seen if they didn't see it, and sort of bring things together. Plus, I would also do a lot of helping on the way. But yeah, I mean, how much you trust the students will do on their own, it's something to be cautious about. We want to think that they really want to learn, and in practice, they just want that A to get to the next class. And it's a sad reality that we need to be aware of, that you would think about after more than a decade of teaching. You think that I knew, but I did make a mistake of over hoping how much they would just read a chapter on their own. And I think my role was more important than I estimated in one of those sections.
Thank you.
And I forgot what the other thing was. If it comes
That
back.
was that was the main thing, is that things that you learned to absolutely avoid, and yours being that not counting on the students doing what they're supposed to do as far as reading the chapters and
Yeah.
adding to that. Okay, Aria?
Yeah, I would say, I think the point was mentioned earlier that surveying students ahead of time can be a very useful way of gauging and making the decision about how much synchronous to include. And fine-tuning those questions is really important, I've learned. So I would say I will never again ask an open-ended question about how students prefer to learn, because honestly, they don't know a lot of times, and it's also not useful feedback when you get 120 different answers. So I do think that carefully thinking about your own options, so maybe you're thinking 50% synchronous, maybe you're thinking 75% synchronous, maybe you're wondering if 33% is really enough. I would say frame the question for your students in a very conscientious, directed way, like, SMU requires a minimum of 33% synchronous. How does that percentage reflect your learning style? Very well. I actually benefit more from more synchronous. I actually benefit more from, fewer synchronous opportunities as possible, because I love asynchronous learning and I live in China, and so it's going to be hard for me to attend. So I would say absolutely solicit feedback. Getting feedback from the students is fundamental, but be very careful about asking really open-ended questions about, like, how do you learn best? How would you like the format to be? Because I don't think that the feedback will be useful, and I think it's opening an unnecessary can of worms. So
Awesome. Bivin, do you have, we're running out of time, so we have to go really fast.
I know we're on a short one. So yeah, I would just piggyback from where we kind of started. I think my biggest mistake was very early assuming that everyone was getting my messages, and that assuming that that again, that we were all on the same page. So to go, and that can just hose up every great plan that you have is out the window if nobody knows about it. So so to put that out there, to if I had it from the very beginning of the day, go and make sure that the students that are not attending, that they at least know that you know that they're not attending. And I bet you'll find a large percentage of them not only attend, but really participate. They just want to know that they were there, that they've been heard.
Okay, and then my last thing, and things that are a must, or maybe words of encouragement, and we have like 1 minute left. So Bivin, you want to start?
All right, yeah, encouragement. Well, that's what we're, to Marcela's point, that's what we're here in the classroom. One of our big things, to encourage, to support, to inspire, to share everybody's passion. And I think you can do that in Async. We got the SMU Flex, we can do that in the classroom, and that's now videoed. I really think, I'm very optimistic that because of this, we are going to have the tools become even more effective, and have our passion and have their passions inflamed and just spread even more. So we're in the frontier of it, but good luck out there, and let your style come through. Don't be afraid to really experiment out there and see what happens.
Awesome. Marcela, do you want to add?
One thing is just be very clear and concise with the information. Have it all in one place where the students know where to go, because they're receiving lots of emails from every professor, from every organization they're in, and they're just going to lose it. So have one place where they can come back and know that they will find it, and have only what they really need, because they have an overload of information.
Awesome. And Aria?
yeah, my words of encouragement would just be that, we're not alone. And I think if anything, this experience has taught me that there is a much wider community that we now have access to. So if you have a question or a fear, it's probably being asked by 100,000 people in different forums online. So take advantage of those opportunities to make networks across campuses. Join those forums, pose those questions, steal those resources. I think everybody's open to sharing right now more than we ever have been before. So this is not, I know it feels isolating, but it's actually a wonderful opportunity, I think, to really strengthen our ties with other people working in our field across the globe.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you for all of your time, faculty. You've been awesome. And we're going to go ahead and conclude. Our next webinar starting is going to cover, I believe, using the power of groups in Canvas. So if you're interested in that, that is starting in about 10 minutes. But thank you so much for your time and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Bye. Take care.